911 dispatcher stared at her screen in confusion. A call from a residence on Hobby Road in Copperas Cove, Texas, had just disconnected abruptly, but not before the unmistakable sound of screams echoed through the line. It was 12:25 p.m. on April 7, 2022, a moment that would forever mark a devastating fault line in the lives of 6 children, a community, and a family left to piece together why. All units, we have a 911 hang-up call with screaming in the background. Address is on Hobby Road. Proceed with caution. The responding officers arrived quickly, approaching the residence with practiced vigilance. They heard arguing inside, raised voices punctuated by sudden silence. Then, as they reached the front door, a male voice called out, telling them to wait. Seconds later, the situation deteriorated. More screams. Gunshots. The officers made the split-second decision to breach the door. What they encountered inside would become a scene of unspeakable tragedy. Near the entrance lay 33-year-old Destiney Carey, a dedicated nurse and mother of 6 with multiple gunshot wounds. In the living room, officers discovered 37-year-old Kevin Frazier, also wounded but alive. One bullet had passed through a window during the chaotic moments of entry, narrowly missing an officer, sending glass fragments into his leg. Despite immediate life-saving efforts, Destiney was pronounced dead at the scene. The violent end to her life stood in stark contrast to how she had lived, with purpose, compassion, and boundless energy for her family and community. Just hours earlier, Destiney had been making plans. As a nurse who worked in Georgetown, she balanced the demands of healthcare with raising her 6 children. Beyond that, she owned 2 successful businesses in Killeen, with plans for a 3rd location in Dallas. One was a clothing boutique that had become popular with local women and models, evidence of her creative vision and entrepreneurial drive. Her daughter, Desiree Cannon, would later describe how her mother's laughter could transform any room, bringing warmth and joy to everyone present. Destiney lived a life characterized by resilience and determination, qualities that made her death all the more devastating for those who knew and loved her. But beneath the surface of this tragedy lies a more profound question, one that haunts every case of domestic violence that ends in death. How does a relationship deteriorate to the point of murder? What invisible line was crossed on April 7, 2022, that transformed a documented history of domestic conflict into a fatal conclusion? This is the central mystery we'll explore. Not just what happened in those final moments, but what led to them. What series of decisions, escalations, and missed interventions culminated in this tragedy? The investigation would reveal that just one day before the murder, on April 6th, police had responded to the same address for a domestic violence report. No charges were filed. Less than 24 hours later, Destiney was gone. The case of Destiney Carey forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence, about the sometimes hidden dangers that exist in relationships, and about the devastating consequences when warning signals go unheeded or unaddressed. If you find these stories important, not just as accounts of crime, but as lessons that might help prevent future tragedies, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue creating thoroughly researched content that honors victims while providing insight into complex human experiences. Hit the like button if you appreciate our approach to these difficult subjects, and let us know in the comments if these stories have impacted your understanding of domestic violence. Now, to truly understand the magnitude of this loss, we need to know more about who Destiney was, the life that was taken, and the light that was extinguished far too soon. To understand the profound loss that occurred on April 7, 2022, we must first understand who Destiney Carey truly was beyond the headlines that would later define her final moments. At 33, Destiney had already built a multifaceted life centered around care, connection, and ambition. Born and raised in Texas, she found her calling in healthcare, working as a dedicated nurse in Georgetown. Her colleagues would later describe her as someone who approached patient care with genuine empathy and attention to detail, qualities that made her exceptionally good at her job. Nursing wasn't just an occupation for Destiney, it was an extension of her fundamental desire to help others during their most vulnerable moments. But nursing was only one dimension of her busy life. As a mother of 6 children, Destiney navigated the complex choreography of family life with remarkable grace. Her mornings began early, preparing her children for school while organizing her own demanding schedule. Evenings were filled with homework help, family dinners, and the 1,000 small moments that make up family life. Despite the inherent challenges of raising 6 children while working full-time, those who knew her marveled at her ability to give each child individual attention and support. "My mom could make you feel like you were the only person in the world when she listened to you," her daughter Desiree Cannon shared. "She never half did anything. If she was helping with homework, she was fully there. If she was at work, she gave her patients everything. If she was working on her businesses, she poured her whole heart into it." This capacity for wholehearted engagement extended to Destiney's entrepreneurial pursuits as well. She owned 2 successful businesses in Killeen, including a clothing boutique that had gained popularity among local women and models. Her eye for design and her understanding of what made women feel confident and beautiful informed her business model, creating spaces where customers felt both seen and celebrated. Far from being content with her current success, Destiney was actively planning expansion. Her vision included opening a 3rd location in Dallas, a strategic move that demonstrated her business acumen and forward-thinking approach. She maintained detailed business plans and financial projections, often staying up late to refine her strategies after her children were asleep. She would tell me, "Dreams don't work unless you do," recalled her sister. Destiney didn't just talk about possibilities, she created action plans and followed through. She taught all of us that success comes from consistency and hard work. Beyond her professional life, Destiney was deeply integrated into her community. She participated in local initiatives aimed at supporting women entrepreneurs, occasionally offering mentorship to those just starting their business journeys. She donated clothing from her boutique to women re-entering the workforce, understanding that confidence often begins with how we present ourselves to the world. During community events, Destiney was known for her authentic warmth and infectious energy. Her presence transformed ordinary gatherings into memorable occasions, her laughter serving as the soundtrack to many community moments. Friends noted how she could navigate any social situation with natural ease, making newcomers feel welcome and established members feel valued. When Destiney walked into a room, people gravitated toward her, a community member shared, not because she demanded attention, but because she gave it so freely to others. She remembered details about your life, asked meaningful follow-up questions, and genuinely celebrated your successes. What makes Destiney's story particularly poignant is that her life was characterized by giving and nurturing. As a nurse, healing others, as a mother raising her children, as an entrepreneur creating opportunities, and as a community member lifting those around her. The vibrant, determined woman described by those who knew her stands in stark contrast to the tragic circumstances of her death. Her life reminds us that behind every headline involving domestic violence is a complete human being, someone with dreams, responsibilities, relationships, and a future that should have unfolded differently. Destiney's legacy lives on most powerfully in her 6 children, who carry forward her values, her work ethic, and her capacity for joy despite the trauma of their loss. The final 24 hours of Destiney Carey's life revealed a troubling escalation that, in retrospect, foreshadowed the violence to come. Court records and police reports document a crucial detail that adds context to the events of April 7th. Just one day earlier, on April 6, 2022, police had responded to a call at the same Hobby Road address. The nature of this call was documented as assault with bodily injury, family violence. Officers arrived, statements were taken, but ultimately no charges were filed. This incident, while seemingly resolved at the time, represented a critical moment, a documented instance of domestic conflict between Destiney and Kevin Frazier that would serve as a prelude to the next day's tragedy. What happened in the hours between this initial police response and the fatal confrontation the following day remains largely undocumented in public records. However, What is clear is that any interventions or de-escalation attempts that may have occurred were insufficient to prevent what followed. The morning of April 7th began like many others in the neighborhood. Residents went about their routines, leaving for work, tending to household tasks, or caring for children. For Destiney, it may have been a day of balancing her nursing responsibilities with her entrepreneurial pursuits. For Kevin Frazier, it would become the day that defined the rest of his life and ended Destiney's. By noon, something had changed dramatically in the Hobby Road residence. Neighbors would later report hearing raised voices and arguments coming from the home. The disagreement, whatever its nature, was escalating beyond typical relationship conflict. At approximately 12:25 p.m., someone inside the residence called 911. The call was brief and abruptly terminated, but not before the dispatcher clearly heard screaming in the background. This hang-up call immediately triggered an emergency response protocol. Copperas Cove Police Department officers were dispatched to the scene with the limited information available. A 911 hang-up with screaming. This type of call alerts officers to potential danger, but provides little specific information about what they might encounter. As officers approached the residence, they could hear ongoing disturbance inside. Upon reaching the front door, they attempted to establish contact with the occupants. A male voice, later identified as Kevin Frazier's, called out for them to wait. This hesitation, this request for delay, proved momentary. Within seconds, the situation deteriorated dramatically. More screams emanated from inside the home, followed by the distinctive sound of gunfire. The officers, trained to respond to imminent threats, made the split-second decision to force entry into the residence to intervene in what was clearly a life-threatening situation. The scene that greeted them as they breached the door was chaotic and dangerous. As they entered, another shot was fired. One bullet passed through a window, narrowly missing an officer's body, but sending glass fragments into his leg. The proximity of this shot to law enforcement personnel would later contribute to the additional charge of aggravated assault against a public servant. Inside the home, near the front entrance, officers discovered Destiney Carey with multiple gunshot wounds. Despite their immediate efforts to administer life-saving measures, her injuries proved fatal. Justice of the Peace Bill Price would soon arrive to pronounce her dead at the scene. In the living room, officers and firefighters located Kevin Frazier, also suffering from gunshot wounds to his torso. Unlike Destiney, his injuries were not fatal. He required immediate medical attention and was transported to Carl R. Darnall Army Medical Center for treatment. As first responders worked to secure the scene and provide medical assistance, investigators began the meticulous process of evidence collection. They documented the location of the firearm, collected bullet casings, and mapped the trajectory of shots fired. Blood spatter patterns were recorded, and photographs were taken to preserve the scene exactly as officers had found it. Neighbors gathered outside, drawn by the sudden presence of multiple police vehicles and the sounds of the violent confrontation. They shared with responding officers what they had heard: the arguments, the gunshots, the screams that had preceded official intervention. These witness statements would later form an important part of the investigation's timeline. For the 6 children who called Destiney Mom, life changed irrevocably that afternoon. Their mother, the energetic force at the center of their family, the woman who balanced nursing, entrepreneurship, and parenting with remarkable skill, was gone. The home that should have been their safe haven had become the site of unspeakable violence. As this case unfolds, we're confronted with the devastating reality of domestic violence and its potential for deadly escalation. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse, please know that resources exist to help. Organizations provide support, safety planning, and emergency intervention for those in dangerous situations. If you find value in these explorations of difficult but important topics, please consider subscribing to our channel. By liking this video and sharing it with others, you help amplify conversations about domestic violence prevention. Your comments also create community around these issues, a community dedicated to understanding, preventing, and addressing relationship violence before it reaches the point of no return. Now, to understand the full complexity of what happened on Hobby Road that day, we need to examine more closely the figure at the center of the investigation, Kevin Frazier. To comprehend the events that transpired on April 7th, we must examine Kevin Frazier, the 37-year-old man at the center of the investigation. While Destiney's life was well documented through her professional achievements, community connections, and family relationships, Frazier's background contains notable gaps in the public record. What emerges from court documents, police reports, and witness statements is a portrait defined less by personal accomplishments and more by a pattern of concerning behavior. Frazier was a resident of Copperas Cove, Texas, and involved in a domestic relationship with Destiney Carey. The publicly available information about his educational background, employment history, and community involvement is limited, a stark contrast to the rich tapestry of details that define Destiney's life. This asymmetry in public information itself speaks volumes about the differences between victim and perpetrator in many domestic violence cases. What stands out most prominently in Frazier's documented history is the pattern of domestic discord. Police records reveal a critical incident on April 6, 2022, just one day before the fatal shooting. Officers responded to a call categorized as assault with bodily injury, family violence, at the same Hobby Road address where the murder would occur. Though this incident did not result in formal charges, its timing and classification signal an escalating situation that would culminate in violence the following day. This documented incident represents a crucial moment in understanding the relationship dynamics. It suggests that tensions were mounting, conflicts were becoming physical, and intervention opportunities existed in the 24 hours preceding Destiney's death. While we cannot know what conversations or interactions occurred between the April 6th police response and the fatal confrontation, the rapid progression from documented assault to homicide illustrates the often accelerating nature of domestic violence. Frazier's actions during the events of April 7th reveal additional insights into his behavior. When police arrived at the residence following the 911 hang-up call, it was Frazier who called out, telling officers to wait. This attempt to delay police intervention occurs frequently in domestic violence cases, often representing an effort to control the narrative or situation before authorities can properly assess it. During the subsequent investigation, Frazier provided statements to police that proved inconsistent with the physical evidence gathered at the scene. Forensic analysis, including ballistic matching and trajectory reconstruction, contradicted key aspects of his account. These discrepancies between his version of events and the physical evidence suggest an attempt to construct an alternative narrative, another common behavior pattern in cases of domestic homicide. After receiving medical treatment for his own gunshot wounds, Frazier was arrested on April 9, 2022. The severity of the charges, murder and aggravated assault against a public servant, was matched by the substantial bond amounts set, $1,000 for the murder charge and $750,000 for the assault charge. These figures reflect both the gravity of the alleged crimes and the court's assessment of flight risk and public safety concerns. What emerges from this evidence-based assessment is a pattern consistent with escalating domestic violence. Research has long documented how domestic conflicts often follow progressive intensification. Verbal arguments escalate to threats, threats progress to physical assaults, and physical assaults can ultimately culminate in homicide. The documented incident on April 6th, followed by the fatal shooting on April 7th, aligns with this established pattern of acceleration. The relationship between Frazier and Carey exemplifies how domestic violence crosses socioeconomic, professional, and community boundaries. Destiney's success as a nurse, entrepreneur, and community member did not insulate her from becoming a victim. This reality contradicts common misconceptions that domestic violence only affects certain demographics, or that professional achievement somehow provides protection against relationship violence. The investigation would further reveal that Frazier's inconsistent explanations about his location and actions during the shooting contrasted sharply with the forensic evidence. The trajectory of bullets, the position of the victims, and the physical evidence collected all pointed to conclusions that did not align with his account. This pattern of contradiction between perpetrator statements and physical evidence is frequently observed in domestic homicide investigations. What makes this case particularly notable is the compressed time frame of escalation, from a documented domestic violence incident to homicide in less than 24 hours. This rapid progression from conflict to fatality highlights the potentially explosive nature of domestic violence situations and the critical importance of immediate and effective intervention when warning signs appear. The evidence-based profile of Kevin Frazier that emerges from verified records thus reveals not just an individual, but a pattern of behavior that tragically aligns with established research on domestic violence, escalation, and intimate partner homicide. In the aftermath of the tragedy at Hobby Road, the Copperas Cove Police Department launched a methodical investigation that would transform a chaotic crime scene into a comprehensive legal case. The process began immediately after first responders secured the location, with the residence officially designated as a crime scene. Forensic teams arrived promptly and implemented standard protocols for evidence preservation and collection. Their first priority was documenting the scene exactly as officers found it, photographing the positions of both victims, the recovered firearm, and the distribution of bullet casings throughout the residence. This visual documentation would prove essential for reconstructing the sequence of events and establishing the spatial relationships between all parties involved. The recovered firearm underwent immediate ballistic testing to confirm it as the murder weapon. Laboratory analysts compared bullets recovered from the scene with test-fired rounds from the weapon, establishing definitive matches through microscopic examination of the unique striations created by the gun barrel. This ballistic evidence confirmed that the recovered weapon had fired the bullets that struck Destiney Carey, creating an unbroken chain of evidence linking the firearm to the fatal injuries. Blood pattern analysis revealed additional crucial information. Forensic technicians documented blood spatter distribution using established scientific methods to determine the position of both Destiney and Frazier during the shooting. This analysis contradicted aspects of Frazier's later statements about his location and movements during the incident. The blood evidence, when mapped against bullet trajectories, painted a clear picture of the positions of both individuals that directly conflicted with Frazier's account. The autopsy findings provided by the medical examiner added another critical layer to the investigation. The examination confirmed that Destiney Carey had sustained multiple gunshot wounds, with the medical examiner determining the precise angle and distance from which the shots were fired. These findings, when integrated with the crime scene analysis, further substantiated the forensic reconstruction and contradicted key elements of Frazier's version of events. Witness testimony formed another pillar of the investigation. Neighbors reported hearing arguments and gunfire before police arrived, establishing a timeline that aligned with the 911 hang-up call. Several residents described hearing escalating voices, followed by multiple gunshots, then a brief pause, then additional shots, a sequence that matched the physical evidence collected at the scene. These accounts from nearby residents provided independent verification of the timeline constructed by investigators. The 911 call itself became a crucial piece of evidence. Although brief and abruptly terminated, audio analysis confirmed background screaming that indicated an active disturbance. The timing of this call, positioned against neighbor testimonies and officer accounts, created a consistent timeline of escalation leading to the fatal shooting. Perhaps most damaging to Frazier's defense were the statements he provided during police interviews. After receiving medical treatment for his non-fatal gunshot wounds, Frazier participated in multiple interviews with investigators. These sessions revealed numerous inconsistencies that directly contradicted the physical evidence. He claimed positions and actions that forensic analysis proved physically impossible based on bullet trajectories and blood pattern distribution. When presented with these contradictions, Frazier's explanations shifted, a pattern that investigators documented meticulously. Each revised account introduced new elements that remained inconsistent with the established evidence. These evolving narratives, when contrasted with the unchanging physical evidence, significantly undermined his credibility and strengthened the case against him. Investigators also explored the critical April 6th domestic violence incident that preceded the murder. Officers who responded to that call provided statements detailing their observations and interactions with both Destiney and Frazier. These accounts established a documented history of conflict that contextualized the events of April 7th as an escalation rather than an isolated incident. Search warrants were executed to examine personal records and potential communications between Frazier and Carey. While the specific contents of these records remain within confidential court documents, investigators confirmed that the evidence gathered further supported the case against Frazier and revealed additional aspects of the relationship dynamics leading to the fatal confrontation. The comprehensive nature of the investigation produced a robust case file that led prosecutors to file formal charges against Kevin Frazier on April 9, 2022. The charges included murder for the death of Destiney Carey and aggravated assault against a public servant for the bullet that narrowly missed an officer during the initial police response. The substantial evidence assembled, from forensic analysis to witness testimony to Frazier's own contradictory statements, created a solid foundation for the prosecution. Throughout the investigative process, detectives maintained close communication with Destiney's family, providing updates while respecting their privacy during an incredibly difficult time. This careful balance between transparency and sensitivity reflected the department's commitment to serving both the legal process and the community experiencing this loss. The investigation into Destiney Carey's death exemplifies how modern forensic techniques, witness accounts, and suspect interviews combine to build a comprehensive case. Each element, from microscopic bullet striations to neighborhood testimonies, contributed to a detailed reconstruction of the events of April 7, 2022, transforming a chaotic crime scene into a methodical pursuit of justice. The legal proceedings against Kevin Frazier began swiftly following his arrest on April 9, 2022. Charged with the murder of Destiney Carey and aggravated assault against a public servant, Frazier faced severe consequences, reflecting the gravity of his actions. The court set bond amounts that underscored the seriousness of these charges: $1,000 for the murder charge and $750,000 for the assault charge. These substantial figures represented both the severity of the alleged crimes and the court's assessment of public safety concerns. The arrest affidavit detailed the evidence against Frazier, including the forensic analysis that contradicted his statements, witness testimonies from neighbors who heard the altercation, and the documented history of domestic disturbance at the residence. This comprehensive documentation served as the foundation for the prosecution's case, presenting a clear timeline of escalation, culminating in Destiney's death. While the legal system pursued accountability, the community of Copperas Cove responded with an outpouring of grief and support for Destiney's family. Memorials emerged spontaneously as news of her death spread. People who knew her as a nurse, entrepreneur, and community member gathered to share memories and process their collective loss. One particularly moving tribute involved a balloon release near her boutique, symbolizing both remembrance and the release of grief that follows such a senseless tragedy. These community gatherings served multiple purposes: honoring Destiney's memory, supporting her 6 children who now faced life without their mother, and bringing attention to the issue of domestic violence that had claimed her life. What began as expressions of mourning evolved into conversations about prevention, intervention, and support for those experiencing domestic abuse. Destiney's family members became powerful voices in these discussions. Her daughter Desira spoke eloquently about her mother's impact. "My mom taught us to face challenges head-on, to build something meaningful with our lives, and to lift others as we climb. Now we have to live those lessons without her guidance." These personal reflections transformed Destiney from a statistic into a real person whose absence created a profound void in many lives. Her sister emphasized that while the manner of Destiney's death was tragic, her life should be remembered for its vibrancy and accomplishments, rather than its violent end. Destiney lived with purpose and joy. She raised amazing children, healed patients as a nurse, built businesses from nothing, and made everyone around her feel valued. That's who she truly was, not a victim, but a force of nature cut short too soon. The case has prompted renewed attention to domestic violence intervention. Advocacy groups have pointed to the documented incident on April 6th, just one day before the murder, as a critical moment when different interventions might have altered the outcome. This timeline has sparked discussions about enhancing response protocols, improving follow-up procedures after domestic disturbance calls, and strengthening community support systems for those in volatile relationships. Police departments, community leaders, and family support organizations have used Destiney's story to highlight how domestic violence affects people across all demographics, including successful professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders. Her case illustrates that domestic violence respects no boundaries of education, achievement, or social standing. In reflecting on Destiney Carey's legacy, we find a life that embodied resilience, compassion, and determination. As a nurse, she healed others. As an entrepreneur, she created opportunities. As a mother, she nurtured 6 children who now carry her values forward. As a community member, she built connections that survived her death and transformed into advocacy. The tragedy of her loss reminds us that domestic violence remains an urgent public health crisis, requiring robust response systems, education, and community vigilance. Each life lost represents not just an individual tragedy, but also a call to action. To see the signs earlier, to intervene more effectively, and to support victims more comprehensively. As we conclude Destiney's story, we invite you to honor her memory by taking action. Subscribe to our channel for more cases that highlight important social issues. Share this video to spread awareness about domestic violence prevention. Most importantly, use what you've learned to support those who might be experiencing relationship violence in your community. Your comments below can contribute to this important conversation and create community around prevention. Destiney Carey's voice was silenced on April 7, 2022, but through remembrance and action, her legacy continues to speak, calling us toward greater awareness, more effective intervention, and a future where such tragedies become increasingly rare.